And does that sound all right? Okay, so I'm just going to get it started today. I just want to say hello to those who have joined us. Welcome. And our presentation tonight is titled Ways to Support Your Irritable, Stressed, and/or Anxious Child, Listening, Connecting, and Implementing Boundaries. My name is Katie Boggs, and I am co-chair of the Mental Health PTSO Committee at Myers Park. And we have here tonight a wonderful speaker, and I am going to let one of my co-hosts, Holly Wood, introduce our speaker tonight.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. We are so grateful to have Mike Harris with us tonight. She is a psychologist here in Charlotte and has owned her own practice since 2021, and it's called Mycology. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
Mike intermingles traditional therapy with other beneficial practices like yoga, art therapy, and mindfulness. She received her bachelor's in psychology from Tennessee State University, which is the HBCU in Nashville. And it's actually the same one that Oprah Winfrey graduated from. Mike has also earned a master's in clinical psychology from Loyola University in Maryland. And her focus in her practice today is on supporting teens, young adults, and adults. Mike supports all races, all genders, all backgrounds and religions, and all people, but specializes in supporting girls, women, LGBTQIA, and people of color who may be experiencing anxiety, depression, and or just going through small or big life transitions. I love that Mike has a teenage daughter herself, and so she really knows this stuff, not only from a professional perspective, but also from personal experience as well. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much, Holly. I really appreciate, being able to connect and have the opportunity to talk to parents. It was so great a few weeks ago to talk to the students and just give them a little tidbit of information in a short amount of time, but we all know that a little can go a really long way. So I'm so happy to be here. Today, we really have a focus, and I always like to put kind of an interesting spin on things. I really like information. I like data. I really like to educate people and give information, but then also leave everyone with something very practical to implement in their lives, hopefully. So hopefully, you'll leave with something that you can implement in your life, literally starting tonight, tomorrow, this week, or sometime very soon in a time that it makes a lot of sense for you. But we're going to do this ways to support your child really through this identity development. So let me kind of get over here and we shall start. So make some adjustments here. So ultimately, when it comes to identity development, there is a ton of identity development that is happening always. And there's so many psychologists and theories that are really looking at identity development. I have a background in early childhood mental health. So that's really looking at development all the way from birth to what we would say kind of 18, a little bit older. But ultimately that development, is happening across the lifespan, of course. But when we're really focusing on the teenage years, there are some specific things that are happening in terms of identity development. And so high school really marks this continuation of this development, but we really want to get into it and really get a deeper understanding of what's really going on and how we can kind of interweave into the development that's naturally happening. Sometimes we're not really feeling like we're a part of the fabric, right? We feel like we're kind of ripping the fabric apart as our kids are starting to try to weave together like who they are. And so we really want to help them get an understanding of how to go through that process in a really supportive way. The big question is, who am I, right? And identity is at the core of everything. It's at the core of some of the things they do, whether it is the things that they're interested in, the sports that they may engage in, extracurriculars that they engage in. Sometimes people feel that's a really big part of their identity. Identity is a part of who they are around. So, you know, who their friends are, and social is a really big part at this age. And then also in terms of what are they going to do with themselves, right? And so it's kind of like, who do I want to be? How do I want to be fulfilled? What are the things I want to do after school? You know, in college, after college, et cetera, all these different periods of time, or after high school graduation. What we're going to do is we're going to get into Jane Marcia's his identity development matrix, and it's specifically around the adolescent period of time. And this is really kind of an expansion of Erikson's developmental models, and so some people may be familiar with that, but this is really, really isolated into these teenage years. And so the idea, the kind of spin on it that I want to have, is that if you can really get an understanding of how important the identity development is, and try to really connect with your child through the listening, the building the relationship, setting boundaries, then it may be less of a fight. It may be less of a push-pull. And there are some things that we as adults do that create really a push-pull. And I hear about it every day, almost every week, when I'm working with these teens in therapy. They're telling me why they're not talking to you. They're telling me what they're, you know, thinking when they are trying to talk to you. They're telling me the things that they aren't telling you. And this is great. It's great to be a therapist and have a support system. But ultimately, what I want to do is, in addition to being that support system, really turn it around so kids can feel like they can build a relationship with their parents. Because I always say that the adult child and adult relationship, like that parent child relationship, is longer than the parent child relationship. Okay. All right. So if we move on, ultimately, excuse me, trying to figure this out on my end. So this is who I am. Yes, I am actually a clinical and integrative psychotherapist. I've been licensed since 2007. I've worked in clinic settings. University of Maryland Psychiatry is where I started kind of like my career after grad school. I've been in school-based settings. I was at Trinity Episcopal School, was their first head of counseling there. I was there for 5 years when I transitioned after having my daughter. So I know a lot about the school systems and a lot about kind of how to be really present and what are some of the priorities like within some of the school systems, and connected with a lot of the school systems. And then I've also worked in private practice in Maryland and in here. I was in a group practice, and then have been in a solo practice on my own since 2021. Of course, as Holly was saying, I support a wide variety of people. I do support men, I do support boys, but I definitely have a specialty with like girls, teens, young adults, women, and then some specialty focuses. A lot of anxiety and depression is a main kind of clinical focus, but I do a lot of life transitions. So that can be small life transitions or large life transitions, but it's a really big part of what I do. And then I also have kind of a niche in supporting women through premenstrual disorders like PMDD and some of the things that we don't necessarily talk about, and some of the changes that kind of come in later life. So let's kind of get to it. At the end of the day, teens really need to feel seen, valued. They want to be acknowledged, not only by the people around them, but they're really trying to acknowledge like who they are. And sometimes that can be really hard. Individuals can be really critical of themselves, and they are sometimes very hard on themselves because they don't necessarily want to really kind of accept who they are, because there's a lot of comparison going on, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of criticism. The majority of kids that I speak to in counseling, it doesn't mean that all of them feel this way all the time, or that every child feels this way, but I think a lot of our teens are walking around with insecurities and self-doubt. There's so much comparison. We know that social media drives a lot of it, but it really is kind of embedded into the nature of our society, this kind of competitive nature. And so I do think that that really affects identity development in a really profound way. But ultimately, everybody wants to be seen and valued for who they are at the core. And a lot of the work that I do is really centered around how do we get people to kind of come back to their identity and who they know themselves to be, or they develop themselves to be, and how can we reduce kind of cognitive dissonance. And that's basically kind of who they are at the core and how they operate in the world matches up. Okay. If we continue to explore this kind of this deep desire to be understood, it really first starts with them understanding themselves, right? And so a lot of times kids feel like they don't understand themselves. They don't understand why they may desire certain things, whether that is kind of mentally, emotionally, or in their physical bodies. They're not necessarily clear on what they want to do and how they want to be, if that makes sense, kind of in their own minds. And so there is a lot of exploration around that. And sometimes it's not as clear internally as we think that it is, or it's not as definitive as some teens may actually present, right? And so we'll kind of get into that when we start to explore the matrix. But ultimately, people are really trying to get solid in who they are, and embrace that. And that can be a challenge. Then we're moving on to people want to be seen and heard by others, right? They want to build relationships. They want to feel connected. The social aspect of high school is huge. We know that if we have kids, if they are connected to their friends and they are in spaces where they feel like they are kind of seen and accepted and they have connection, a lot of them tend to do better, be more fulfilled, be more satisfied with themselves, be happier. We know that if there are rifts in the social circles or there are things that are going on, that it can be in some cases devastating, whether that is temporarily devastating or it has long-term effects. But the social aspect of our teens' life is a really, really big deal. Equally, we know that if teens are having difficulty connecting to others, if they haven't really found their people or their circle, that can shape a lot of things as well. And it does have an impact on who they are, or it can create also some questions about who they are if they feel like they're not socially connecting in a particular way. Then we move on to, really wanting to connect and be seen and heard in the world. And so there are some different developmental models. Some of them look at race development. There are lots of different models that really ultimately are going through the stages and really getting into how people are connecting with themselves and then ultimately with the world. And so all of these things are very, very important, and it's important for us to take these into consideration. So I want you to be thinking about, when it comes to identity, the fact that kids are really trying to, one, get solid in themselves, get solid with their connections with others, and get solid with, kind of who they are in the world, right? All simultaneously. So this is where I think it's really important that we do a lot of the core work. This is the part of me that is kind of like the nerdy part that likes information and likes data. So I'm going to give you some information and data as the foundation to this aspect of identity development. Okay. So this is something that I have been sharing and teaching for a long time. I teach it to groups. I also teach it to individual teens and have them identify where they think they are at. I would probably say 90% of the time when kids do this, their identity and where they find themselves on this chart matches up with where I think that they are. So a lot of kids are very self-aware, but it doesn't mean that that provides all of the answers. And so I also share this with parents so they can get more information about where their teen may be. And sometimes it can give more insight and also reduce some of the fight, like I was saying, in kind of moving forward. So there's so much that we could say, but let's go over the basics. So in Marsha's matrix, right? First of all, he's looking at commitment and exploration. Okay. So commitment really is how much somebody is engaged and fully committed with that particular thing, right? So if they are saying, I want to be a ballet dancer and I'm going to be a ballet dancer, and they said that at 5 and at 10 and at 15, that is someone who is highly committed to what they want to do. Okay. Or you might have someone who's floating around, and, I think of like my daughter, like she tried everything under the sun, every sport, every extracurricular, I think as parents, we really do that. We're really kind of exposing them to all these things. But there might not be a high commitment, right? So out of all the different things that my daughter did when she was younger, she kind of landed in 2 specific things that she loves: rowing and volleyball. And so with the exploration, right, and the exposure, I should say, she still had relatively low commitment. So commitment can be, I always kind of say like low or absent, or it's high or present. Okay. Then we get into exploration, and exploration really is how much somebody is really exploring something. So if we go back to the sports analogy or the extracurricular, in that example, we can say a lot of kids have a lot of exposure, therefore they can explore a lot of different things. So we would say that the exploration is definitely present, but exploration also can be low or absent. Okay. What we want to think about in terms of identity development is that kids are moving through these different areas, all right, in terms of their identity. And let's start to explore each of them. Okay. Let's start with the identity diffusion. So identity diffusion is really looking at when there is very, very low exploration, and there is also low commitment. Okay. So if you think of someone who's like, not really, they're like, I kind of do this one thing. I'm not really interested in that. I don't really want to engage in that. No, I know, mom and dad, you suggested me doing this or whatever it is, but I'm just not interested, right? There's really not a lot of exploration. And then in a lot of cases, therefore, there isn't a lot of commitment to it. The issue with the identity diffusion is that kids are kind of like floating in some ways, right? They're not really locked into anything. It's really hard for them to discover what they like. It's hard for them to discover things about them that they feel very solid in, because they're always kind of just floating. They're either floating because there's just low commitment, or they're floating because they're not actually exploring at all. Okay. This can really leave some feeling kind of lost, feeling unanchored. They're kind of like, in some ways, like just kind of haphazardly floating from thing to thing. But the issue with this diffusion is that it's really hard to solidify identity. And that's where we start getting back to kids feeling a little bit more lost, right? And so that can be challenging. All right. Now we kind of get into this identity foreclosure. All right. I will say that there are so many things that I can say about each of these and examples and everything. But for the sake of time, I'm going to try to be concise, and then I'm happy to answer questions as well. All right. So some of the main notes that I made for the identity foreclosure is that identity foreclosure has to do with high commitment, okay, but also low exploration. So example of this would be, instead of somebody trying a lot of different things or exploring a lot of different ideas or being open to a lot of different types of beliefs or whatever it is, they kind of hone in and lock in on one or two or a very few things in terms of their identity, and then that is their identity. Okay, that is something that's really important to them. So low exploration, high commitment. Sometimes this can be viewed as a very positive thing, because some people say, hey, this is the religion that I'm going to be. I am this political identity, right? Sometimes I get into this with parents when we're talking about kids who are exploring sexual orientation, right? They just say, you know what? I heard that on a podcast and I can relate to that. I had a 10-year-old tell me last week that that 10-year-old was watching like a cartoonist, like an artist or someone like doing their work like on YouTube, and that person said that they were aro ace, right? And so because they're aro ace, that 10-year-old, and then they described it, that 10-year-old was like, oh, that seems like me, like I don't have any like interests, I don't like any of these girls, and I don't have a crush on any of them, so like I must be like aro ace. And so this 10-year-old, he was basically telling me like that's his identity, right? And nothing wrong with that, but it's a clear example of, right, low exploration, really lack of knowledge, okay, in that particular situation because of age and stage, but also having some exposure, and then this high commitment, okay. A lot of times this is, kids just, dressing how their parents dress them, or taking on beliefs because that's the household, that's the household belief, and they're not really moving through that with enough high exploration, okay. Then we move into this moratorium. Okay. Moratorium is a very complex space because there are a lot of challenges with this. There are some negatives that go with it. There is some very difficult experiences that teens have. But the thing that I want you to know is that this is a very, very important stage of identity development. This is when exploration is high, okay, and commitment is low, all right? Exploration is high, commitment is low, okay? If we think about those juniors who are thinking about what they want to do after graduation, and they say, I want to go to this one school, I'm applying early decision, I don't need to do anything else, go anywhere else, visit anywhere else, I know my major, I know everything, that's what I want to do. That feels actually really impressive. And for some kids, that is going to be a good fit. However, for the majority of our students, it may mean that they need to explore a lot of other things, right? Is college even the right fit for you? Do you need to take a gap year? If you are going to go to school, what are some of those schools that are going to be the best fit for you? Let's actually start to visit those places to see. Let's do a lot of exploration so you can get a lot of information and data that connects with like who you are and what you want to do in the world, right? And then start to make some commitments, okay? We want to keep commitment low during the stage because we want to make sure that you're really looking at a lot of things, okay? That's just an example, right? The college, or I should say not necessarily college, but after kind of graduation and what people are deciding to do, okay? And the reason I emphasize that is because everybody has different paths. And sometimes, even though I am saying that, I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging that everybody has different paths and that everybody's path is not necessarily to graduate and to go to school. There are so many other things that people can do where they can find success and be fulfilled, okay? All right. So what ends up happening is that when kids are in a moratorium, if we think about lots of different things, who their friends are, if we think about the things that they're exploring, right? If we think about aspects of identity development, right? From all different ranges, we see that there can be a lot of confusion in this stage. There can be a lot of changes in this stage. Some parents get to a place where they're feeling like, I don't know what's going on with my child. You know, one day they're over here and now they're over here. They're saying this and now they're thinking this. They're with this group and now they're, you know, there's so much happening that it actually seems like an identity crisis. And when you're looking at this model, on some aspects, they say this is kind of identity crisis, right? The thing is that we want some of that on some level. What we need to do, and we'll talk about this a little later, is figure out how to support our kids through that and navigate it. A lot of times when kids start going through this, we're actually really kind of working against them. And we're trying to kind of, you know, I don't want to say like lock them in, but we're not really understanding why this stage is important, especially if we see our kids struggling, especially if we see that there are some things that are really challenging for them. Okay. What I want to emphasize is that teens can kind of be all over the place and it still be okay, right? We just got to figure out what to do when they're in this stage. Now we move on to this identity achievement. And with identity achievement, it is going to be high exploration, right? And high commitment. In other words, they've done the exploration, right? And they've gotten to a place where with all of the exploration in all of these different areas, they feel very comfortable making a commitment to some of the belief systems that they have, some of the ideals, the people that they want to be around, really the core of who they are. They've explored lots of different things and they feel very solid in that. When we get to identity achievement, for most, it's not going to happen or be completely solidified in high school. So just know that. I work with college students. I absolutely love the work that I do with them. And there's a huge growth and change that happens from kind of 18 to 21. And so a lot of this kind of identity achievement is going to happen later. The challenge that I see is that sometimes because kids have such a difficult time in the other stage, there are rifts that are created between parents. And so when they're really solidifying some of this identity achievement, there's not a strong parent-child relationship, or it's not as strong as it really could be. Okay. So we want to be able to start this journey with our kids, right? Continue it on and help them all the way through when their frontal lobe and everything is developing, right? We're thinking late 20s, 30s for some. Okay. So I will admit, I am one of those people. I love being in front of an audience and the energy and the engagement. And so I'm at this place where if there are questions that want to come up, I'm happy to answer them like directly if they come up in the screen, even if one of my kind of like co-host says, hey, there's a question, I'm happy to stop and answer that if something comes up in the chat. We don't necessarily have to save it to the end. So now, how does all of this get to what we need to do and how we really need to support our kids? If kids are really working towards identity achievement, then the thing that's really important is that we really want them to really emerge feeling very grounded and supported and solid in who they are, which means that we need to provide some things. I start with listening because teens want to be heard and validated. We all want to be heard and validated, but a lot of times because we are in the throes of parenting, we're very used to doing things a certain way. And so we kind of override some of the things that we know that we need to do because we're in the thick of real life, right? Hearing and validating. What does that mean and how do we really do it? Okay. In terms of kids wanting to be understood, a lot of times when a parent or authority figure gives a suggestion or they offer a solution, right? Or they provide some kind of other insight, it can invalidate someone's feeling or experience, right? It doesn't seem like it would, but a lot of times when somebody just wants to be heard and they want their feelings and their experience validated, if somebody comes in and they make a suggestion, or they have a criticism or whatever it is, people start to shut down because they ultimately feel like they weren't heard and validated. And so, because parents, a lot of times we want to fix it, we want a solution, we want our kids to feel better, or we think that we know a better way, we automatically will receive information. And then what ends up happening is we shut our kids down by offering some of those things that we think are beneficial. And so, specifically, when kids come and talk to us, we need to be in a place where we can be present and just listen and receive. Validating does not mean agreement. Validating does not mean that we have to co-sign on whatever is happening. It just means that we need to receive and hold space for the feelings and the experience that our kids are having. The more that we can do that, the more that we're actually going to build trust. I do have kids tell me that they don't fully trust their parents really hearing and validating their experiences, because in a lot of moments where they've shared, they feel shut down by the way that their parents responded, even though that may not be our intention as parents. Okay. How do I put this plainly? I put it plainly by saying this: we talk too much as parents. Okay. We say too much. Sometimes we need to just receive information. That can be hard to do. People say, well, how do I go about this, Mike? What do I need to do? If you find yourself in a space where your child is talking to you, see if you can just engage by asking questions, right? Some of those questions are, help me understand, right? Explain to me more, right? Doing some active listening skills, right? I see that you experienced this. How did it make you feel, right? Just continuing to get them talking and opening up, you can get more information. A lot of times, because we talk too much, we end up giving a ton of information and we have no idea where our kid really is, because we took over the conversation and we didn't take the time to really get an understanding and dig a little bit deeper into like where they are at that particular moment. And most importantly, what are their needs? If you find your kid opening up to you, right, one of the things that you can ask is, what do you need? Another thing that you can ask is, how can I help? Right? They may say, you can't help, I just need you to listen, right? And that's an okay answer. Two things that I teach, if anything, right, where you're in a conversation and you need to give some feedback, see if you can break it up, even if it's breaking the conversation up by 30 minutes, right? Maybe it's morning to evening or the next day or even the next week. Have a conversation where you just listen and you receive, and then have another conversation where you say, I was thinking about what you were telling me. Here are some of my thoughts. Or you can ask, are you open to me sharing some of your thoughts? A lot of times that child is in a completely different emotional space. They're not as emotionally hijacked, and they can hear and receive what it is that you have without as much defense, and maybe actually be better at receiving what you have to say so they can implement some of your suggestions. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on to boundaries. Boundaries are really important because what I think about is we need to create kind of what we did for our kids when they were younger, right? We kind of create this like circle that they can operate in, and they can do a lot of different things within that, but we don't want them to cross the boundaries. And what happens is, as our kids are growing, sometimes we're not growing with them. So we start with a really short boundary, a really small boundary, I guess. And that's appropriate for when they're 10. But we make little movements, right? And those, it seems like we're growing with them as we're, adjusting, but they're moving and developing so fast that we're not actually starting to expand our boundaries appropriately to where they need to be. So when I say boundaries, I want you to think of not just the boundaries, but the space that they're allowed to kind of move within that boundary. Okay. A lot of times kids are crossing some of the boundaries that we set up because they actually aren't reasonable and they don't fit where that particular child is at in their identity development and where they are at in terms of what some of their needs are. So if we're not checking in with our kids and we're not really finding out and in relationship with them, sometimes the boundaries that we have don't necessarily fit, and we're wondering why. There's a problem. Okay. So I'm kind of using this word boundary in a different type of way by looking at not just the boundary, but how they're allowed to kind of operate inside of it. Okay. So are boundaries important? Yes, boundaries are absolutely important. I remember my dad saying this, and he was like a military person, and he's now kind of like in the church, and so it's like these contrasts. But I remember when he was talking about like meeting boys and men and dating and all this kind of stuff and everything, and I'm like, why are you so mean in the beginning and all of that? And he's like, you can't start soft and then go backwards, right? So sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to have some boundaries in the beginning that are a little bit tougher, that are a little bit more rigid. And we are very intentional about pulling back from those boundaries, if you will. Sometimes parents, they give in, kids have phones, and then they're like, okay, I want to do all these things to roll it back. That's a lot harder to do, right? Or they say, yes, my teen, they started driving, they can drive here and there and everywhere. And then next thing they know, they're trying to roll some things back. And so it's one of those things where we actually have to be very, very intentional to put things in place that are matching where our child is at that particular time, okay? Another thing that we want to do with boundaries is that we want to make sure that we are putting boundaries in place, that we give them enough room to actually explore. And so sometimes parents, we're so scared and we're so anxious that we're putting so much control on our kids that they kind of feel the squeeze, and there's this natural tendency to rebel for some of them. In other words, sometimes we put boundaries on kids and they find a way anyway. I hear about all those things, to be very honest. And so how can we be a little bit more flexible on how we're going to meet our kids? So again, we can be in a genuine relationship with them and actually know more about what's going on than less. Okay. To wrap up with the boundaries, I thought it was really important to say that it's really, really imperative that we put boundaries on ourselves as parents. Sometimes we are very controlling, right? Some parents are more controlling than others, and that is because they have not figured out what the boundary needs to be for them and their parenting at their child's particular age. Sometimes as parents, some of that behavior is manipulating, right? And we're actually not letting our kids really explore when they need to be exploring. And we're not letting them have some of the flexibility and thought that they need, whether that's through the way that we're engaging with them, criticizing them, again, really trying to kind of control things and put things in a box the way that we see it. But that can really be a hindrance to identity development and can create a crisis, not only at this particular stage, but also later on. I have a lot of kids who, go through kind of their junior year, senior year, transitioning into their freshman year, depending on where they go to school. And a lot of times there's this kind of fight, like, I want this, but my parents want this. I believe this, but my parents believe this. And kids really struggle with, in some ways, even being really clear on what's important to them, because people are, their parents are really inserting their kind of opinion and influence, maybe sometimes more than they should, especially when you're getting into kids being, 18, 17, 18 years old. Okay. So All right, connection and relationship. This is something that is really important. I'm so sorry. This is something that is really important in terms of um, um, just overall, right? Like this is one of the things that I feel like is the absolute most important, right? Most important thing. And because we are busy sometimes with our adult lives and all the things that go into with our adult lives, we have other kids, we have our own relationships and our personal relationships. We are not necessarily as intentional as we need to be with developing relationship with our kids. Okay. And so it's very important that we really take the time to put energy into our kids. I'm trying to kind of pick my words, but I think just to say it plainly. So let's look at a few of these things, right? One, there's something really simple and it's just spending time. So when I have parents in our sessions, I will often ask, um, how many minutes do you feel like you get to spend with your child one-on-one each week? And I can ask that to a parent of a 5-year-old, of an 11-year-old, right, of a 15-year-old. Of course, those minutes are going to vary. But one of the things that I do often hear the majority of the time is that those minutes are very low. It's not a lot of time. Yes, they have time in the car, driving them, to and fro. They have time maybe at dinner or in other spaces with the rest of the family. But in terms of the one-on-one time, really connecting, finding about their day, some of the things that they felt, some of the experiences that they've had, dynamics and friendships and all of that. We're not really doing that on a regular basis. A lot of parents are, but there are a number of us that aren't. And so we have to really look at how much quality time am I really spending with my child, right? When we are in those spaces with our children, are we really present? Right. There are a lot of times when we're not, right? We are not really fully engaged. I remember conversations I had with my daughter, and there was a time where I just kind of had these like rote kind of like yeah, oh my goodness, tell me more, that kind of thing. Oh, that's fantastic. I wasn't really listening because in some ways, if she was talking about some girl drama or whatever it was just a way for me to really be present, but I wasn't fully engaged, right? So we have to be present and fully engaged so we can really make that connection. The other thing that I think is really important is that you need to ask those difficult and awkward questions, right? A lot of times we just don't ask it. Because I've been doing therapy for so long, I've just gotten good at asking the hard questions to all of my clients. It doesn't matter what is it about. I just ask questions directly because a lot of times that's how you're going to get an answer one way or another. And so sometimes as parents, we don't want to know what the answer is, so we don't ask. And so that can actually set us up to not have some really imperative information in terms of what's going on with our teen. So we need to get comfortable asking difficult questions, asking awkward questions, and most importantly, being prepared to receive an answer. I tell my daughter things like, if I'm asking you, a lot of times I already know the answer. She's 13, so I can get away with that, but that's not always going to be the case. When I think about 15 and 16 and 17, I'm not going to know the answer, right? But what we need to do is really foster relationships. So when we do ask questions, our kids feel like they can trust us. They feel like they're going to be heard, they're going to be validated, and there is going to be a safe space created for them where their feelings and experiences can be held, and they can really talk without criticism and judgment. And they can also get, so to speak, wise counsel if that's something that they really want. Okay. All right. I'm looking at my time and I want to make sure that I create an opportunity for questions. So we will open up to that. I feel like I should have done like some kind of like wrap up or something, but here we are. Yes, Holly.
I'll get us started, break the ice, so to speak. I have a question. So you talk about, spending quality time with your teen. Do you have suggestions, for ways to do that when at this age, often we're like the last ones they want to be with? They want to be with their friends or, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the very interesting thing about like our lives as adults, but also a lot of high school students, is that they have really demanding schedules. And it sounds crazy to be at a place where we have to like get on our teen schedule, but sometimes that can be something that's really important. The interesting thing is that a lot of times when we kind of consider ourselves at the bottom, so to speak, of the list because we are like relative, it doesn't mean that kids don't value the time that they have with us, especially if they have a relationship or want a relationship. And so even when I see kids that have strained relationships with their parents, a lot of times they do want to do something to be able to mend that or to be able to improve the relationship between them. And so if they have the opportunity to spend some good quality time, they're going to take it. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen all of the time, but they will want to. So specific suggestions: talk to your kid about getting on their calendar, which can sound really crazy, to see if you can actually have a date. We do it with our friends, right? In our relationships that we're trying to foster. We do it in our professional relationships. We do it in our intimate relationships or in with our partners or our spouses. But we don't necessarily think to do that with our older children. So if you have to, get on their calendar, right? The second thing would be to actually ask them what they want to do, right? So if you're like, oh, I love golf, we should go golf. Like, can I get on your calendar? Like, and this kind of time, I'll take you golfing and that kind of thing. And that kid is not interested in that, then that may only go so far. So it seems really obvious, but a lot of times we're not actually checking in and saying, what do you want to do, right? I'm down to do whatever you want to do. And then if we do get the space where we actually can spend some time, a lot of times if we're doing what they want to do, we might be criticizing or judging it, or like, why are we here? Like, oh gosh, you're so into this, or that kind of thing. And so we actually need to just be able to kind of follow what they want to do, be fully present, be fully engaged, and just be focused on connecting with them. The other thing that I would add, Holly, is when that does happen, if hopefully that happens, you get on the schedule and then you're doing something they want to do, let's not start to talk about, so like, tell me about college applications, right? Or like, what's happening in chemistry? Or are you really working to get into IB? Have you been thinking about that? Like, we start to go into all of these things that are like hyper stress areas for them. And they're like, this is why I don't hang out with you, So it is really important to be intentional all the way through, from scheduling to what you're doing to how you're spending the time. Hopefully that answers the question.
Totally. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And just so our participants know too, they can write their question in the Q&A box down below, and we'll be able to read that. So if anybody does have a question they want to type there, they can do that.
Yes, awesome. And if for some reason somebody is watching this at a later time, then you absolutely can reach out to me via email by my name, mike@mycology.com. It's MYQUE at MYQUEOLOGY.com. And I'm happy to answer some questions and engage in that way as well. Any other questions?
I was just going to make a suggestion. When you were talking about like validating and just listening to our teenagers, like that is one of the things I struggle with the most, because it is so uncomfortable for me to see my child suffer or to be struggling in any way, and I want to fix it. And I've heard it said that if you, tell me what you think about this, if you are in a space where your child is opening up to you, pretend that they are somebody else's child, or that they are just telling you a dream that they had, and that can put you in a space of not needing to fix it as much.
Yeah, it might kind of diffuse it a little bit. I mean, I think that that really resonates, I would say, because as a therapist, that's literally what, you know, we're doing, all of the time, and really sitting in front of other people's children. And some of the things that I hear, I think, oh my gosh, if my daughter was telling me this, I know I would have a totally different reaction. And so I can say that that's been able to help me, and the opposite sense. But yes, I think that's a great suggestion. Also, the thing is that, you know, I always say, would you rather, your child tell you those things, even if you don't like it and agree? Or would you rather either not know or then tell somebody else, right? It's like, it's kind of like, would you rather be in the room and be a part of that conversation? And so when I'm thinking about, having conversations with my daughter, like about sex and relationships and some of the really complicated drugs and alcohol and parties and this and that, it presents a certain way in my mind. But when I think about how I talk to kids about that, in our sessions, right? It's very direct and very straightforward, and very much meeting them where they are with no judgment. And that's easier when it's not your child, right? But you still take the stance of how you can support. Catherine?
Yes, we have a question in the chat box from somebody here, and it just says, how do you strengthen boundaries?
Yes. My first question would be like, kind of maybe sharing more about that, right? Like, because I feel like there's a lot of different ways that that can go. How do you strengthen boundaries in certain areas? How do you strengthen boundaries between the relationship? I guess my first kind of instinct is like, can you tell us more? Um, um, can you expound more? But I think I'll interpret it and then maybe answer the question. If you want to write more in the chat, please do. Um, but I think that the way that I think about strengthening boundaries is, what are the things that need to be in place to keep everybody in the situation, right? Kind of safe and thriving. The language that I use in therapy is like, how can we put something in place that serves everybody well, right? In the best way possible. And so I think that when you are so just let me say this. I'm kind of interpreting this lots of different ways, but I'm just gonna say it a little bit more, I think, straightforward, and talk about why boundaries are important, and how we can strengthen them. So I think, to specifically answer your question in terms of strengthening, a lot of times you have to put boundaries in place and be consistent and stick to them, right? So if you figure out specifically, what needs to be in place, a lot of times we know what that means, but some of those boundaries can make people unhappy, uncomfortable, and can make a situation conflict ridden, or really kind of feel very problematic. It doesn't feel as easy when those boundaries are in place, right? But ultimately, how do we strengthen them? We put them in place, right, with a certain intention. That intention meets the goal, right? There's a reason why we have the boundary in place, right? So we put them in place with intention. That intention meets the goal, and then we're consistent with why we have that there, because ultimately there is a goal and a reason why we have that boundary. So that's kind of like this overall, like, why I think like boundaries would be important. But I don't know if that answers the question in the specific way that you asked it.
I don't know either, but I wondered if you could give just an example for, obviously we're talking about teenagers here. They, a lot of them drive cars, or they're, pushing the boundaries, right? Where they're asking to do more, either to stay out later, or to, go to things that maybe parents aren't as comfortable with, or, and so what would you suggest for a parent who's feeling like I'm struggling to set those boundaries, or I'm struggling to kind of maintain, what I want to have happen and what my child's asking for? Maybe that kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll kind of give maybe some more straightforward examples and then maybe answer it within that. So like I do have a number of kids that talk about going to parties, and at parties there is alcohol and there are other substances and there are different things that happen between people at those parties. And I think sometimes parents want to put certain boundaries in place because they don't want their children necessarily to be exposed or be in environments where they can potentially be unsafe, right? And so kids sometimes are in places where they're saying, or they're making choices where they're saying, um, um, so to speak, I want to do it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway, and they find those ways to do it. So sometimes I really believe in, is there a way where there can be an acknowledgement of some of the things that may be happening, right, in some spaces? And is there a way to say, here are some of the things that I really want you to know. Here are some of the things that are really important, right? And set some of the expectations, right? I would hope that you're not engaging in this and doing this. And, here are some other options, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or whatever. But at the same time, I have to really trust that you're going to be able to make really good decisions for yourself, right? And here are some ways that you can do that. However, right, if you're going to go to this particular thing, right, can we set some limits? And sometimes there is a negotiation of like what those limits are or the things that you can put in place. So you can go to this particular thing with these particular people for a certain amount of time. However, I have to be able to track you, right? Or I need to know, like some people talk about sometimes like after parties that happen, and it's just like, oh, we're just going to go to an after party and like I'll let you know. And parents don't necessarily know who's throwing it, where it is, all of those things. And so it can be something as simple as, if you're going to go, I need to know where you're going to be, who you're going to be with, and that kind of thing, having some of the information. Other times I think there are just hard boundaries that need to be in place, and kids will be upset, and parents have to be able to, so to speak, deal with their child being upset and not getting what they want, and that's what it is. Some kids are not going to just completely disobey those boundaries or kind of throw them to the wind. They're going to be very upset with their parents for however long and show it, but they'll still respect the boundary that's in place if their parents put it in place. A lot of times parents are giving in and they're negotiating when they really shouldn't. And that's what can be really problematic, or parents are inconsistent and kids kind of find the weak spot in that, I guess you could say, and that becomes problematic. Yeah.
Thank you. That was great.
See this other question. I think I see this question.
Oh, yeah. What are appropriate consequences for teens when rules are broken?
Yes. Okay, what are appropriate consequences for teens when rules are broken? My first answer is that this is probably going to vary. If you're talking about a 14-year-old, I think it's going to look different than an 18-year-old. And so there's going to be the rule. It's going to vary based on what they are. One of the things that we talk about is kind of like this 1-to-1 kind of ratio. So if there's something that happens, let's say that it's something that happens with the phone, sometimes parents will come in and they're like, you lose your phone for 30 days. And maybe there's a consequence with the phone, or the phone being removed, or whatever it is, or something that needs to happen. But it actually isn't kind of like, it doesn't match up, right? The size of the problem doesn't actually match up the consequence. And so it's important that we really work to match the consequence with the size of the problem. So if there's an issue with going to a certain place, with the car or whatever it is, there may be something that happens where the child can't drive the car, whatever, but then taking the car away for a month might be inappropriate for what the consequence is, right? On the other end, if there is something that happens that is really egregious, right, then you want to have a consequence that really matches that. What I would say in general is that it's very important for kids to know consequences beforehand. So a lot of times something happens and then we implement a consequence. We don't sit down and say, this is what's going on. This is the expectation. This is what needs to change. If it doesn't change, here's what the consequence is. Sometimes parents are throwing out kind of empty threats and consequences. Like, if this happens again, you're not going to prom. But when prom really comes around, they don't want to take prom from their child. And so what happens is when they throw those empty threats as consequences, children really understand, well, you're not really going to go through with it anyway, that consequence. And so it undermines the authority of the consequence. So whatever the consequence is, let it be developmentally appropriate, right? Let it match the size of the problem, and try, if you can, to give kids consequences before. Like, for example, my daughter, again, she's younger, turning in her phone. Doesn't matter if it is 15 minutes late, whatever it is late. And I do a lot of, hey, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of raising my voice and doing all that. I'm going to come in, I'm going to say what it is. You're going to process it. And here's the consequence. So it's like, hey, you've been turning in your phone late the last couple of days. If it happens tomorrow, outside of a 5-minute window, I don't care if it's whatever the time is, you will lose your phone for a week, right? Do you understand that? Yes, I understand that. That's it. As soon as that phone is a minute late, right, whether it's because she was cleaning the kitchen or doing whatever it is, then that consequence has to be implemented for there to be a certain authority that's upheld with the consequence. Hi, Holly.
And try hard not to give consequences that punish you in the process, that punish you as the parent.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that I agree with that. Somebody was asking me about this, and this can kind of answer the question as well, but I believe in hard labor. And so, there are times where hard labor can be a consequence, whatever that happens to mean. For your household. My daughter has spread mulch. She has cleaned windows. She's done things because there's something about, like, you've done this, and so you kind of need to work it. I will say that we've kind of changed that over, and like, now we associate hard labor with like earning money and like doing things with less consequence. But there were specific things that were kind of physical activities or hard labor things that I have learned and also have implemented. What's kind of a physical thing, running up and down the driveway, right? Like a certain amount of times. That really isn't something that typically people do when you are in high school, but when we're with the younger ages, there were some associations with some of the behavior modification. Yeah, but hard labor, it can be a good consequence.
Well, thank you, Mike. I want to, I don't see any other questions at the moment, and I want to be aware of everybody's time. And I know we started a few minutes late, so I kind of let us go late, but it's almost 22:08. So I thought we would wrap up and just say thank you so much for being here tonight. And this was great information. And is there anything else that I think you already told people if they have questions, they can email you. Yes, that's the best way.
Yes, if you put my name in the bar, it will come up. People will be able to find me in those ways, and I'm happy to answer questions or any other support that parents or students may need.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much. And thanks everybody for attending.
Yes, thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.